Wow, Mordekaiser is actually good right now. Well, he is in the meta, and I have made fun of him a lot. So a lot of you guys have been wondering about Mordekaiser. Why is he back in the meta? What's going on? He's actually good. What do I do on him? How do I build him? How do you actually play Mordekaiser? So I've decided to make a list. We're going to make this video, and this list is going to be a brief history of Mordekaiser, why he was bad, why he was good, how he was back, and then we're going to talk into more things. So to go over it, we're going to talk about why he was good, why he became bad, what changed since then to make him good, what finally made him good, what runes does he build, what items does he go, tips and tricks with his abilities, which there actually are some, and how his ultimate works. Now, Mordekaiser's ultimate actually does have a lot of janky mechanics that actually I only learned myself that make the champion quite powerful. Lastly, we're going to go over why Project Mordekaiser sucks, because it does suck and you should never go it. So before we go into this, make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, and leave a comment on this or anything about that. I'm hoping, as a lot of my videos do, we can get something we can discuss here. We can talk about this stuff. The more you guys talk in the comments, the more it helps me, and in particular, I just kind of enjoy giving you guys stuff that is worth talking about. So before the item update, Mordekaiser was getting nerfed a lot because his item build was really overpowered. Why was it so overpowered? Because he had an item called Liandry's Torment. Liandry's Torment, now for those of you who didn't play back then, I'll describe it. For those of you who did play, I'll remind you. Liandry's Torment gave health, ability power, it gave you up to 10% bonus damage over time, and it gave you percent health damage. That percent health damage also scaled if you slowed your opponent. Liandry's Torment, combined with Rylai's, made Mord very, very overpowered. He got 600 health off the two items, a chunk of ability power, percent health damage, just have a 1-2 bargain bin combo. It made him very overpowered. Since Mord doesn't really need ability haste or cooldown reduction, he was one of the only champions who could just build these items and shred everyone. So he got nerfed. He got nerfed really hard back then. His passive duration was nerfed from 5 seconds to 4 seconds, and the movement speed was nerfed from 3 to 9% to 3% flat. It used to actually scale up all the way to 10%. And between these two changes, the lower duration, allowing his passive to fall off more, and the less movement speed, meaning people could kite him more, basically just killed this champion. So going back here, what changed since then to actually make him good? Well, a lot of things actually happened that kind of went under the radar. So the first thing was Rylai's was changed from a 20% slow to a 30% slow. Now the idea was to take it from a bargain bin discount item to an actual item at 3,000 gold. At 3,000 gold, they did give it the 30% slow, but it didn't really take off. However, they then changed it back to being a bargain bin item at 2,600 gold, but gave it 400 ability power. So it went from 90 ability power to 75 ability power, got a better slow, and gained 100 HP. For Mordekaiser, 15 ability power. He doesn't have the highest AP ratios. They aren't particularly low, but they're not insane. So 15 ability power in Mord, it's kind of noticeable, but it's not something that's like a horribly big deal. 100 HP fits him better, and a 30% slow definitely fits him better. In addition to that, Riftmaker saw a change when you can now stack up Riftmaker from taking or dealing damage. That happened at the midpoint of the last season and was something that very much helped Mord. Instead of 10%, it scaled to 9%, but it only took 3 seconds to scale up, and if you were shot at, it would start scaling up. That means a slower champion like Mord wouldn't need to run up and hit you with his Q. He could actually just start having it stacked by you hitting him. In addition to that, with the small window of opportunity, he didn't need to build Demonic Embrace, but it actually opened up other builds he could go because it would keep stacked up if he took damage, whereas in the past, if he kind of just walked away from him, his Riftmaker would fall off, his passive would fall off. You know, it was just a really bad deal. So Rylai's got more slows, Riftmaker stayed if he took damage, and then importantly, since this nerf over here, they started to buff Mordekaiser a lot. They increased his damage to monsters, they increased his damage to monsters again, they increased his single target damage on his Q, they reduced the cooldown on his pull. Now that's something a lot of people don't know. His pull cooldown used to be 24 to 12, then it became 22 to 10. That's 2 less seconds, even at the highest ranks is pretty good, but it goes further. Then the single target on his Q was buffed again, then the W cooldown went down from 14 to 10 to 12 to 8, which definitely helps his laning phase. phase and also helps his late game. The amount of damage you store in shield was changed from 35% to 45%, and the amount of that you get on minions was even buffed as well. This means that Mordekaiser can build up his shield much faster, he can get more healing with it in the laning phase, and when he heals with it, it's not on cooldown as much. This helps him sustain much more in the laning phase. This helps him keep his health up by just kind of pushing the minion wave and getting his shield and healing like that, and particularly in the late game, it just helps him get to that second shield more. Then Dead's Grasp, that's his pull, and its cooldown reduced again from, it used to be 24 to 12, now it's 18 to 10. That is a lot less cooldown in the early game. Lastly, they pushed his movement speed back to 3 to 9%. He doesn't have the 5 second duration on his passive, but he got the 9% movement speed back in addition to all these other buffs. One of the biggest issues Mordekaiser always had was I can just look right here. If you look at his kit, his cooldowns are really, really long. Particularly rank 1, they were pretty long. There was 9 seconds on his Q, there was 14 seconds on his W, there was 24 seconds on his E. Now it's 18 and 12, still 9 in his Q, but those are much less cooldowns and much more ability to build up his shield and heal. That gives him more ability to lane into bad matchups where he can just, all he can really do is try to use his W to shield to try to mitigate poke. It gives him much better things he can do against ranged champions by having 6 seconds less cooldown in his E, and in particular, it actually, this is a bit of an opinion of myself, I think it just makes him a lot more fun. One of the issues I always had with Mord was that his cooldowns were so long, and in the old Mord, he didn't build any ability haste. Now he actually gets 15 on Riftmaker. His cooldowns were so long that all he would really do is he would just run up to you with Leandries and Rylai's, and that was it. That was his entire kit. That's all he did. So he's just a lot more fun now. He's good in just being more fun, and he's good in just being way stronger. Let's talk about Mordekaiser's runes right now. You might be recognizing this rune page. It's a pretty typical rune page, but there's a little bit of an addition. Well, actually, the attack speed seems to be a little bit more popular. Okay, so first up we have Conqueror, because Mord's passive procs Conqueror, his E procs Conqueror. He can just stack Conqueror up pretty dang quickly, and it's just always going to be his best rune if it keeps in its current state. Triumph, because you literally can't use Presence of Mind. It will actually just turn into Triumph if you take it, and Overheal is stupid. Then you have Legend Tenacity, Legend Alacrity, Legend Bloodline. 90% of the time you're going to have Legend Tenacity. You can sneak in Legend Alacrity if, I guess, I don't have any CC. I honestly, if you guys start suggesting Legend Bloodline on Mord, I don't even know what I'll do to you guys at this point. Last up, we have Last Stand, because he's a Juggernaut. Last Stand on Juggernauts, right? Over here, we have Second Wind or Bone Plating. Depending on who you're matching up against, if you're fighting a champion who's not going to be jumping on you a lot and is just going to try to burst you down, then obviously Bone Plating is better. If you're fighting a champion who's going to poke you down, then obviously Second Wind is going to be better. Both of them do their job at defending him. Now, Revitalize is something that not a lot of people really think about. So the thing with Revitalize is it makes your shield bigger, and then it makes your heal bigger. So it makes your shield bigger, which then heals you more because you heal from how much is left on your shield, and then you heal more because you're healing. So actually Mordekaiser double dibs on Revitalize, and it gets quite good on him, which also Spirit Visage does, but I'll get into that later. At any rate, Revitalize just gives him hella power in the early game, even into the late game. It makes him quite powerful. The other two options are okay, I guess. Unflinching is okay, Overgrowth is okay. The thing to consider, though, is that Revitalize is just really strong. Now, obviously, Unflinching is really strong, and obviously, Overgrowth is really strong. It's just that, particularly, at least for me, as you get higher rank in the games, that it just ends up, most of the time it ends up just being better, having that better tankiness in early game than it is trying to play for the late game with Overgrowth, or, you know, if you can go Legend Tenacity so easy, you don't really need Unflinching. It's not like attack speed is super important for Mordekaiser that he's going to go Unflinching just so he can take Legend Alacrity. As for runes down here, attack speed on Mord is actually quite good. The consensus is either double AP or attack speed, but I think most people actually go with attack speed overall. Then obviously you're gonna go with damage, and then you grab the armor or magic resist depending on what you're fighting, and these are just pretty typical runes. The most important one to know is Revitalize. A lot of people don't know about the double dipping, and it does make him able to survive, particularly once he goes below that 40% health and he gets the additional 10% strength on it. You'll notice that your W can keep you up in a lot of situations through the healing, a lot of situations that otherwise you would get poked out in. Now to talk about Mord's items, these should be pretty simplistic. Talking about Leandri's Torment earlier, we're pretty much just rebuilding Leandri's like some sort of Voltron build. Mordekaiser's mythic is going to be Riftmaker. Something a lot of people don't know about Riftmaker is that Mordekaiser's Q actually counts as single target if you only hit a single enemy. It gets the bonus damage, and it changes from being an AoE ability to being a single target ability. That means it doesn't get the AoE penalty on Omnivamps. You actually do heal a good amount on it. That means that if you're in your ultimate or you're 1v1ing as Mord, Riftmaker's Omnivamp actually becomes noticeable because it affects your auto attacks and it affects your Q. It doesn't affect your E and your passive, but well, what are you gonna do? Because it stacks, as I showed earlier, it stacks when you're taking damage. A champion like Mord, who's slow, who's always kind of the second man into a fight, he's always going to have Riftmaker basically at full stacks when he actually starts laying into people, so it ends up being pretty good. Now, the bonus damage on Riftmaker isn't the best. I'm not saying this item is top tier. It could probably get buffed and still be balanced and fine, but as of right now, it just kind of synergizes the best with Mordekaiser, and overall it's just going to be his best mythic, and none of the other ones really do any good or synergize with him. Rebuilding the old Leandri's Rylai's combo is, well, Rylai's. Now up to a 30% slow with 400 health, this item just is pretty good on Mord. If you're looking at your second item, you're either going to go Demonic or you're going to go Rylai's depending on who you're fighting. Demonic is obviously pretty solid because this is, you know, a 2% health burn is pretty good. Get a 2% of your health as ability power is pretty, I'm gonna be honest, it's pretty bad. This item will never give you noticeable ability power. It's basically a giant chunk of health and a giant chunk of percent health damage, and then a decent chunk of AP. It's just it's a giant stat stick item, which if you think of Mordekaiser as a giant stat stick, this is the perfect synergy. So I would say this is his core build. Now, what some people will do, which I don't disagree with, is they might go into Zanyas. They might do, say, Riftmaker into Demonic into Zanyas and leave out the Rylai's until 4th item. I'm not saying I disagree with that. That's a perfectly fine option. I just prefer kind of rebuilding my old Voltron with these 3 items, because particularly once you get all this health here, 450 here, 400 here, 300 here, remember, Mordekaiser's W scales with 30% health. So if you're 1v1ing, and if you have your boots set in the right order, so if you're fighting a physical damage champion, you have Ninja Tabby, or sorry, plated steel caps, and you're fighting a magic damage champion, and you have Merc Treads, then with this giant shit stack of HP in combination with your W, you have a lot of health to chew through. And I don't particularly feel the need to go into Zanya's Hourglass this early. I think Zanya's Hourglass is fine. I just personally don't prefer it. Up last, and I'll call these the insert items, because these are the items that aren't core to his build. These are the items that are just good. Now, my opinion, once again, is that Zanya's Hourglass is not core to his build. It's just good. But these 4 I would call the insert whatever you need sort of items. Do you need a healing debuff? You got Thornmail. Do you need to stop people from critting you to death and auto-attacking you? You've got Randuin's Omen. Are you fighting a lot of mages who are kiting you and bursting you down? You got Force of Nature, which by the way is super underrated. Do you just kind of need a generic, I want lots of HP and I don't want to get burned by magic damage item? Spear Visage. Now remember, as I was explaining earlier on Revitalize, Spear Visage allows you to double dip on your shield. Your W shield will be bigger and you'll heal more from it. Because it's bigger, then you'll heal more from it because Spear Visage makes it more. If you guys have watched my streams or watched other Mordekaiser players play, a late game Mordekaiser with Spear Visage can fill a lot of his health back up with his W heal. So this is, a lot of times this is when Mord goes from like, oh man, he's like really big and tanky to, oh man, he's not gonna die. He's just not gonna die. But obviously, so all 3 of these items, or sorry, I should say all 4 of these items have their own worth. If I could briefly go over them, Thornmail is obviously better than Merlenomicon. Mord doesn't really need ability power, and the 60 armor, the pretty easy healing debuff. Just whenever people damage you, right, they get healing debuffed, and if you hit your E, you can also rip them into a 60% healing debuff. So Thornmail's pretty solid. Most champions that heal are also physical, so you know, there's your 1-2 combo. If you're fighting a magical damage champion and you're splitting, or you know, some janky stuff like that, maybe you can consider Merlinomicon, but you're starting to get into more niche situations. Okay, now Omen, I actually consider this item to be pretty solid on Mord as well. Even more health, a good chunk of armor, they reduce damage from auto attacks hitting you, adds up pretty quickly actually, and then the aura means that if critting champions or auto attacking champions and things like Yasuo or Yone or Tryndamere, or even some champions like Samira who are trying to get on top of you, Radoman's Omen, the crit damage reduction, the attack damage reduction just shuts those champions down. You will notice a considerable damage or decrease from them. Force of Nature is, I've advocated for pretty much Force of Nature on every champion in my last couple of videos. If you're fighting multiple magic damage champions and you want lots of movement speed and you don't want to die, Force of Nature is just a solid choice. So I would say these are probably, what are these, your 8? Yeah, these are 8 items. You can use them interchangeably because remember, you can only get 5 and boots, right? So these are your solid items that for the majority of the game, or I should say majority of every games, you're just going to be building 1, or I should say 5 of these 8 items every game. Now, lastly, let's talk about starting items. Can you hit your opponent? Doran's Shield. Can you not hit your opponent? Doran's Shield. Can you hit your opponent? Doran's Ring. The ability power, actually, obviously, I have been talking down ability power on Mord, but in the early game, 15 ability power can be a decent chunk, and because remember, Mord restores HP instead of mana, that means that Doran's Ring for him is it's not an amazing amount, but it's a decent amount of healing that can kind of keep him in the lane, so you're not up shit creek paddle, right? And so yeah, I would say these are your 2 choices. I would say overall, if you can hit people, just go Doran's Ring. If you really can't and you're just going to keep getting poked down, well, obviously Doran's Shield. And that's what these 2 items are designed for. And I would say the Doran's items, after 12 such years, or actually it's probably been 10 years since they stopped rebalancing them. So about 2 years ago, they stopped really rebalancing the Doran items. They actually did get them into a pretty decent state. I'd say all 3 of them pretty much serve their purpose. So that would be Mord's items. Okay, now for some tips and tricks on Mordekaiser, because I know all of you guys think that Mordekaiser is super simple, and well, he is, but it's nice to give some tips and tricks. So for his Q can, for the most part, hit most champions in the early game. However, I want to suggest to people that even if you can hit someone with your Q, unless you can force that to an all-in, that maybe sometimes in the early game you shouldn't, because a lot of times they're going to be sitting in the middle of a minion wave. You Q someone in the middle of a minion wave, and you deal damage to them and the minion wave, and you push it. Unless you can do enough damage that a gank on you might result in your opponent dying, as in you've gotten them to half or less health through this sort of poke, and you can guaranteed that they can't really assist the gank, then often and sometimes consider that maybe just don't go for that early game harass. However, with that said, his Q does get that 45. Remember, it's now 45% the damage he deals to champions he stores as damage. That can add up to a considerable amount. That means that if you hit someone and you W, you can heal a decent chunk of damage, particularly in the early game. If you hit a bunch of minions and you hit the opposing champion, you can get up to half shield. That's 15% health. If you're healing 40% of that, you know, that's going to be a good 6% of your health bar back just from whacking some minions and a champion with 1 Q. So if your opponent isn't going into you, remember, again, his W is a lower cooldown. You can kind of, you know, if you back off a little bit after you get that heal and you just soak in some damage, you can whittle people away with Mord, slowly drain them out of the laning phase, and kind of win through attrition sometimes. Now, with his E, I do want to mention something with his E. Let me mention this real quick. If I cast E as Mord, you see how with no boots and as one of the slower champions in the game, even a dead center E, I can just easily walk out of that. Mordekaiser's E is not fast enough to hit anyone in the game. Until you're getting into late game Cho'Gaths or maybe a Scion, there's no champion who can't just walk out of his E. So what you want to do is wait to use your E until you know your opponent is doing something. Running away in a straight line or casting an ability. I mean, just to show you an example of that, if you were to cast his E while someone is casting an ability here, do you see how I can't escape that? Now, that's actually a good example because Mordekaiser's Q is a 0.5 second cast time. Many champions that have actual long casting abilities are longer than that. Aatrox's Q, for example, is 0.6. If Aatrox uses E already and he goes to cast a Q, that is a guaranteed E hit. If a ranged champion is going in for an auto attack and you know they're about to auto attack you, that's an E hit. These are pretty good ideas. Now, let's talk about Mordekaiser's ultimate, because Mordekaiser's ultimate is a very finicky ability. I don't quite understand it fully myself, but I can give you what I know so you guys can use it better. Okay, here is Mordekaiser's ultimate. When I use it at range, it gives them not that much distance to run through, right? If I use it directly in melee, it tries to be fair. It gives them a healthy amount of distance to run through. Do you see that? That's not so great for Mord, actually. A lot of people try to use his ultimate dead center, and that's probably the safest area to use it because you know they can't just run away. But a lot of times if you use his ultimate dead center, your opponent can run away for a long time before they hit the edge of it. This is actually true too. Even if you do the E into ult combo, they do end up next to you in the ultimate, but they're going to have a lot of space to run through. So how could you do that better? Now, I'm not saying this is bad, but how can you do this better? Well, Mordekaiser is the master of death. As a master of death, he can cheat death. Your opponent can, of course, get a large distance to run away from, right? But what if they were trying to run this direction and you were here? Well, if you're on the other side of them, suddenly it's giving them a fair distance to run through. The Death Realm is being fair to them, but as you can see here, is it really being fair to them? Because they're trying to run away here or here, and suddenly their only space to actually run to is back into your own jungle. How can you use that even more? Well, if you E into ultimate, they do get a fair distance once again, but now they are behind you. Now remember, Mordekaiser's ultimate does slow during the cast time. So if a Jax, for example, runs into melee of you, and you just instantly E into ultimate, he's slowed, and now he's behind you. You back him with a Q and an auto, and all of a sudden your passive is up from the EQ auto, and now they have to run to the other side of you, because, well, shit, let me use a better example here. They're over here, they can't run away from you, they have to run through you. This might not seem that important, but these are actually, this is something about Mordekaiser's ultimate that's actually rather interesting. I didn't know anything about this. I kind of just thought it was random at times, but no, it actually, a lot of using Mordekaiser's ultimate is knowing the mechanics of it, knowing that it's trying to be fair. Oh, you're in melee with Mord? Well, we wouldn't want you to be totally fucked, so we'll give you a fair distance to run through. But use the fact that the Death Realm is being fair, and use the fact that you are the master of Death Realm to make it unfair. And that's how you play Mord and his ultimate optimally. Just some things to think about, some things to dwell on when you use your ultimates. For example, if you're fighting a tank or something and you literally just walk up to them, is there like if Ornn is casting his W and you literally just walk past him into ulting, well, that's the only distance he has to run now. How's he? He's dead. He's dead. As a last little treat, I'm going to show you all why Project Mord sucks. Not only is it this weird flanderized skin where his horns are massive and that just looks bad. I don't know why they made his horns just super massive. That's actually my first like visual complaint. Mord has horns, but they're not like the mainstay of his kit. But in this skin, they kind of just make his horns just like, what is going on here? It's like what's going on with this? But okay, let's move past it. Why is Project Mordekaiser actually bad? And I mean actually bad, not just aesthetically. Why is it actually bad as a skin? Well, that's actually really simple. Here is auto attacks. Do you see how weird and it's like they start up slow and then they move real fast. So you have to basically rely purely on muscle memory because they don't animate at the same speed as his other auto attacks. I mean, you have to like know to kind of cancel them early. Do you see that? You have to kind of like cancel them before they really connect with the target. It's super janky, but let me actually show you how it gets even worse. After using a Q, his next auto attack, do you see that? His next auto attack doesn't time correctly and it's super weird. Do you see how it doesn't actually animate anything? I'm actually attacking. You can see I'm attacking because I'm getting stacks on his passive. Do you see that? That's an attack. It's so weird. It's so janky. It's so bad. And yeah, that'd be my video. Project Mordekaiser, I would probably not recommend it. The animations are really bad. As for everything else, I hope you enjoyed watching that, and I hope you enjoyed this entire video. I've been wanting to make a video on Mordekaiser so that you guys would know he's not actually terrible right now. So, as I said earlier, make sure to like, make sure to comment, make sure to leave something down below. And thank you all for watching. Special shout out to my Patreon supporters. If you want to support videos like this and more on Patreon, I would recommend just go on Patreon and support me there, because that helps me a lot, actually. Seriously, it does. Supporting me on Patreon helps me a lot. For as little as $3 a month, you can help me. Special shout out to my YouTube members, anyone who likes, comments, every one of you. Thank you all for being here. Hope you all have a great rest of your day. Goodbye, everybody.